Hi friends, welcome back to my channel. It's Michelle here from happyhealthyher.com. And this week's compassionate chat, we are talking about another societal norm, something that we've been told for years that doesn't quite pan out. So last week we talked about the topic of compromise being necessary for all happy relationships and how that actually isn't true. And it's something that actually typically gets us stuck in manipulative relationships. Well, this week we're talking about the concept of people being replaceable. You've probably heard this before. It's a classic manipulator tactic for people to believe that they're not valuable, that they're not unique, and that they're basically replaceable in any capacity. So this is an extremely common notion in corporate America. I have heard this repeatedly in my job, said directly to myself when I was having a challenge at work, and also spoken about other colleagues. And it never sits well with me because it's definitely not true, and it's inherently narcissistic. It's inherently believing that people are literally just cogs in the machinery of life, that we can just take one person and replace them with another person, and they're gonna do the same job, they're gonna have the same impact. It's absolutely not true. It will never be true, but we hear it all the time. Now, we have had some of the strangest things happen in our workforce in the last 4 years, ever since the pandemic. People are starting to rise up, and a lot of people have done quiet quitting, which I don't really believe in, but I can see why someone would do it. Or they've done sort of the mass exodus thing where everybody was leaving because they were realizing that they were being manipulated in their jobs, and that their lives were worth more than what they were sacrificing. So it's a major shift, and I think a good portion of this is people actually waking up to their value in a healthy way. I'm not suggesting people think they're more important than everyone else. That's actually narcissistic, of course, but having the balance to recognize that we all have unique skills that we bring to the table. So I have seen this actually with 3 different managers. I've actually had them say this exact statement to me, that people are replaceable. And in 2 of those managers, they were actually the head of the agency. It was a nonprofit agency. It was 2 different nonprofit agencies. It was the head of each of those agencies, which by nature was shocking to me. That you're doing nonprofit work, you supposedly see the value of humans and humanity, and yet you have this very tunnel visioned perspective on people being, again, cogs that are just interchangeable. So one of the people was a gentleman, and he was referring to another employee. He was just actually talking to me. It was almost like he was setting a tone of his power, that he was the supreme power in this organization, and so don't get any funny ideas. I mean, he actually wasn't being rude to me, but he was insulting another employee by saying that they could easily be replaced. And I remember at the time even being shocked, because the person was very much the heart of the department that he was referring to. They were someone who had strong connections with everyone, and it was not hard for me to see that if that person left, things would very likely fall apart. But the fact that he said that to me really kind of made me think. And I think it is important to recognize that when someone says this to you, that they are not a very healthy person, that they are very likely a manipulative person, that they don't see that people have unique qualities that they bring. So that person, of course, years later, took me a while to figure this out, but I realized they were a narcissist, and they were actively using all the people who worked for them to make themselves a lot of money. They had a lot of money, and they paid very, very low. And so it was such an interesting dynamic to watch. The same scenario happened probably a good 4 or 5 years later. I was in another nonprofit, sitting in the office with a very narcissistic manager, and she said the exact same thing. And again, she wasn't necessarily directing it at me. I think she was talking about another employee in my department. But it was almost like she said it to me so that I was given the heads up that, hey, this is how I feel about people. I will let people go in a heartbeat. And they actually did. This person did actually fire and let people go fairly haphazardly for things that were shocking. So as a side note to that, something that I never really knew is that it's actually fairly hard to fire someone legally. And so if you're in a situation where someone's threatening you like that, or actually actively taking measures to fire you for something that is maybe arbitrary, or because they just don't like you, or they're narcissistic by nature, you can seek legal counsel. I mean, I don't necessarily think it's ever worth fighting a narcissist, but I do want to put that out there, that a lot of us live in fear thinking we could possibly get fired by someone. But especially if you're in a larger corporation, it's actually very hard to fire someone. So a third situation with someone who actually used that same phrase, people are replaceable, was with someone who I liked very much, and I do not believe was actually a narcissist, but because we were working in a very toxic, hierarchical, narcissistic environment, and our manager, the head of our department, was most definitely exhibiting narcissistic traits, this person was also sort of spewing back the same rhetoric that they had been taught, that they were aware of. And it's that person in particular was actually quite fear-based. I think they were very afraid that they were going to lose their job. And so they led with that level of fear and that sort of belief that, oh my gosh, any one of us can be replaced at any time. But the very interesting thing is, it's just never true. And if you're in a situation where someone is telling you that, please know that you are totally unique individual, and no one is ever going to be you, and no one can ever replace you. You know, what's really funny to me is this has been my awareness even with employees that were not very good. So I had a role where I had to manage people, and it was students and it was people who were, a per diem status, and some people were outstanding at the job and some people were not that great and really just didn't care that much about it because they were just sort of in an interim job. You know, some people take temp jobs and it's not their passion, and you can see it. And so I was able to sort of see this different level of people showing up for their jobs with different intentions. But even the people who were not very good at their jobs, or were not exhibiting much passion, or weren't clearly that wasn't their fit, it was interesting to see when they left, the dynamic of the department totally shifted. Sometimes in a good way for the most part, but always in some way. So I think that's important to see that people kind of bring their own energy, and people are far more than the sum of their parts. So even if someone maybe isn't like a particular technical wizard at their job, they might be a fun person. And they might just be lift the energy in the department because they're silly and they're happy and they're positive. I've seen that many times. And the reverse is true too. Someone who can be great at their job, but they're kind of a jerk. They don't get along with people, and they're bossy and they're manipulative, or they're a bully. And they lower the energy in the environment. So, I think for a lot of us, this is a very obvious reality. If we can read energy, if you're an empath, if you can sort of sense the energy in a room, you know this. You know that people bring in a variety of different traits that have very little to even do many times with their particular skill set. Sometimes it's literally just the energy they are bringing to the table. And sadly, I will say, when it comes to corporate America, there are standards, and there are certain people that sort of fit the standards and certain people who don't. So, and even there are people who have very unique qualities that make it hard for them to fit into, like, say, an office or a team environment, because many jobs, and this is definitely my experience with the nonprofit world, expect you to know and do a wide range of things. And that can be really hard, especially, I've been working in the communications field. You're expected to know everything in communications. You have to be a writer, you have to be a designer, you have to be an editor, a proofreader, you have to do photography and imagery. I mean, it's literally all encompassing if you get hired in a job to do communications. So I've had people working with me and for me who were in the communications role, and they were very good at one thing. They had one particular skill set, great at image editing, but they couldn't really write well, or they weren't able to edit, or they didn't, they just weren't very good in general at organizing their time. Well, they weren't going to be the best employee for that role. And it was really hard to explain that to the person and have them not be angry. But this is just reality, that if you're especially good at one thing and you're put into a place where you're not the right fit, well, then you're really better off either being a solo entrepreneur or like finding a role that values you for that one thing. But the basic gist of what I wanted to share today is really what I just said at the beginning, and that is that no one is replaceable. And if someone is telling you that, it's a huge red flag that they don't value you in all the ways that you are magical and special and unique. And you really probably want to stay away from that person because chances are they are looking to manipulate you and control you in some way rather than accept and love you as you are. So I hope this was helpful. If it was, please go ahead and give a thumbs up and subscribe, share with friends. I really appreciate your support, and I thank you as always for being with me. And I wish you happiness and good health always. Thanks.